Operation Anadyr, the cover story that worked. To understand why the ocean boiled that day, go back to one word, Anadyr. It sounded like winter, a river in the Far East, boots in snow. That was the point. Khrushchev needed a mask that whispered Siberia while ships steamed for the Caribbean. His reasons stacked. Berlin bled prestige. Havana sat 90 miles off Florida, fragile after the Bay of Pigs. Most of all, American Jupiter missiles in Turkey pressed a finger to the Soviet throat. Parity without waiting for factories. If Washington kept weapons near Leningrad, Moscow would park them near Miami. The gamble, speed, secrecy, and American assumptions. Anadyr wrapped everything in misdirection. Soldiers drew parkas and felt boots to sustain the winter lie. Manifests promised tractors and irrigation pipes. Crates labeled agricultural equipment hid launchers and missiles. Radio silence clamped down. Even captains learned the truth at sea, letters opened under KGB eyes. In New York, diplomats soothed, defensive aid, nothing more. Fidel Castro accepted because it meant survival and pride. Exiles trained in Florida. Another landing felt inevitable. A Soviet nuclear umbrella made that landing suicidal. But he wasn't fully in the loop. He knew the outline, not the triggers. Havana would learn later how far Moscow was willing to go and how far it was. In Moscow, Anadyr McCoyan backed the move and banked on negotiation if discovery came early. Timeline was leverage. The faster the deployment, the stronger the hand. In Washington, John Kennedy faced a hawkish military strung by Cuba's 1961 fiasco. Robert McNamara believed in controlled force. Air Force General Curtis LeMay believed in decisive blows. Personalities set to collide with assumptions. Scale hid inside the crates. The Soviets moved not only R-12 MRBMs and planned R-14 IRBMs, but tactical nukes, FKR-1 coastal cruise missiles, short-range lunars, and nuclear bombs for IL-28s. Warheads followed on the Indagirka on October 4, 1962. That battlefield kit made any US landing a nuclear proposition. Command authority for those weapons, if invasion severed communications, was intentionally ambiguous. Under bombardment, decisions might devolve to colonels in cane fields. Meanwhile, the American lens blurred. After Francis Gary Powers' U-2 shoot-down in 196 and a U-2 loss over China in 1962, risk tolerance dipped. Weather scrubs in September weren't reset fast. Coverage gaps opened as Soviet convoys rolled off Cuban docks. Refugees reported long trailers under canvas, pale Russians guarding fenced compounds. Analysts flagged SAM sites, the fan-shaped SA-2 signature, but national estimates leaned defensive buildup. The deception exploited American habits. Soviet lies at the UN were expected, but planting strategic missiles in Cuba felt reckless, even irrational. Analysts overweighted what they thought the Soviets wouldn't do. Maskirovka worked best on belief. It didn't just use camo nets, it pressed on cognitive shortcuts. On the island, crates moved under palm frond screens. Cuban militia guarded perimeters they didn't fully understand. Night convoys slid through Matanzas, headlights taped. A Soviet officer rehearsed FKR drills off a dirt road, measuring arcs toward beaches American planners knew by name. He didn't need the code word ORTSAC to prep a kill zone. Khrushchev believed speed could outrun discovery. Erect launchers, train crews, mate warheads, then confront Washington with a fact. Trade followed. Remove your Jupiters in Turkey, pledge not to invade, we'll talk. It was a bet on secrecy's shelf life. It almost worked. Kennedy kept the circle tight. McGeorge Bundy filtered intelligence. Dean Rusk weighed diplomatic paths. McNamara ran force ladders. The Joint Chiefs sharpened options, airstrikes, invasion, or a maritime quarantine. Each assumed there was time. Anadyr tried to steal time. Inside CIA's photo lab, a micro-story. A photo interpreter slid a print under a magnifier, traced the arc at San Cristobal, tapped a SAM nearby. Bomber runs just became suicidal. He circled a shadowed cylinder and scribbled 3 letters, MRBM. That pencil mark would walk into the West Wing and change the week. Meanwhile, something else was happening at sea. The Navy's confidence in signaling, sonar pings, flares, practice charges, rested on doctrine the Soviets didn't share. That mismatch would matter when steel met steel. Above the waterline, rules sounded crisp. Below it, heat, noise, and dying batteries translated pings into threats. The last sharp turn. By early October, Soviet warheads were dug in at Bajukal and Managua, guarded under earth berms, camo nets slung like laundry. Tactical units rehearsed under the same discipline as strategic sites. When the big fields went on alert, the small ones shadowed them. Beaches, airfields, roads, inside somebody's kill box. So when the photos finally reached Kennedy on October 16, the discovery didn't start the clock. It revealed it. The deception had held just long enough to load the island with weapons the United States hadn't imagined and to seed a command ambiguity designed for bombardment. Washington saw launchers. It didn't see a 12-hour fuse laid across beaches and runways or a Foxtrot safe with a single nuclear torpedo. The mask worked because it fit American expectations until it didn't. Then the story accelerated. The missed signals, how Washington slept through the delivery. Here's where the clock should have slowed, and didn't. By late summer 1962, tips piled up like driftwood. Refugees told Coast Guard debriefers about long trailers under tarps slipping through Matanzas after dark, pale Russians guarding fenced compounds in the countryside, convoys that didn't stop at checkpoints. The flow wasn't the problem, the filter was. Analysts heard noise shaped by Excel politics and fear. They shaved away anything that sounded like strategic. Defensive build-up, sure. SA-2s, probably. Nuclear-tipped MRBMs in Cuba, unlikely. Meanwhile, two ghosts walked the lens. Francis Gary Powers' U-2 went down over the Soviet Union in 196, and another U-2 was lost over China in 1962. Risk tolerance shrank. September sorties scrubbed for weather weren't automatically reset. A single cancelled mission became 5 lost days. In those days, canvas peeled back, erectors drilled, and warheads were trucked under nets toward inland bunkers. The SA-2 fans jumped off film, petals around a guidance radar, classic signatures, but national estimates kept using the word defensive. It was technically true for what was on the briefing table that morning. It was strategically wrong. 3 days earlier, a source in Havana had sent a sketch. Long cylinders on cribbing near San Cristobal, paired trucks, support vans in a pattern he swore looked like a missile park. The drawing hit a desk already saw from false alarms. Over interpretation, someone wrote in the margin and moved on. While they debated, Soviet ships with deceptive manifests kept sliding into Cuban ports, and night convoys doglegged around towns with radios pointed at music, not traffic updates. Then the tactics shifted. The Joint Reconnaissance Center routed more low-level RF-101 runs around the island's edges, avoiding the thickest air defenses. The SAM threat pushed pilots down and out. The photos came back sharp but narrow. Mosaics missed the precise angles where revetments grew into recognizable launch sites. Meanwhile, the SAM belts hardened, radar vans tested beams, and searchlights practiced arcs across airfields that would soon matter to men in parachutes. Inside the West Wing, language hardened too. Briefers told me George Bundy and Robert McNamara the build-up was serious but likely defensive. The phrase, "no evidence of strategic missiles," slid into talking points. It created a frame that would take a magnifier and a specific shadow to break. Kennedy, burned by Bay of Pigs advice, didn't want to leap at rumor. He asked for more coverage, caution and weather answered with fewer flights. Unknown to them, the Indagirka's cargo, warheads for R-12s and FKRs, Lunars, and IL-28 bombs, had already been offloaded by October 4, 1962. Technicians were racing through mating procedures behind camo nets strung between royal palms. Communications discipline held. Cuban militia manned roadblocks around dull grey warehouses without windows. Rumor said tractors. Guards didn't correct anyone. In a Langley photo bay, the frame finally hit the right angle. A young interpreter saw a long, ribbed tube and the skeletal arms of an erector, berms cut like a clock face, support vans lined nose to tail. He circled the cylinder and wrote 3 letters, MRBM, then carried the set upstairs before his section chief returned with coffee. That walk bent the weak. But even that reveal sat on top of a deeper blind spot. The analysts were counting launchers, not fuses. Beneath the strategic picture was a tactical minefield EXCOMM didn't imagine yet. FKR coastal missiles tucked near possible landing strips, lunars assigned to beachheads, gravity bombs waiting for IL-28s if runways stayed intact. The invasion plans in Pentagon drawers assumed clean skies and runways. The island's dispersal plan assumed bombardment and acted accordingly. At sea, another missed signal hummed. The Navy believed in signaling, sonar pings, flares, practice depth charges preset shallow to compel compliance. The doctrine assumed the other side shared the dictionary. Soviet submarine commanders hadn't been briefed to read those patterns as punctuation. In a steel tube at 110 degrees with batteries dying, a warning sounded like an attack. 4 Foxtrot-class boats were already inside the quarantine ark, each with a single nuclear torpedo locked in a safe. Washington didn't know that variable existed. Captains would feel it. Meanwhile, intelligence tradecraft cut both ways. Cratology spotted common missile boats on decks and SAM gear in yards, but big cargo rode below. False manifests said agriculture, machine parts, irrigation pumps. The truth traveled by courier, not radio. Even Soviet ship captains opened sealed letters at sea under KGB eyes. Maskarovka wasn't just camouflage, it was diet. Feed the adversary what he expects to taste. By the time Bundy laid the first undeniable MRBM photos on Kennedy's low table on October 16, Discovery didn't start the clock. It revealed one. Launchers weren't fully operational, but readiness curves had started to rise. Timelines in the room said weeks. Timelines in Kane Fields said hours once orders came. And layered beneath the debate over airstrikes, invasions, or a quarantine was a command ambiguity designed for bombardment. If lines were cut and Marines appeared, authority might devolve to a colonel with a code word and a truck. That's how Washington slept through the delivery, not lazily, procedurally. Habits trimmed outliers, weather trimmed sorties, doctrine mistranslated danger. The mask fit American expectations until a pencil circle broke it. And even then, the photographs showed less than the fuse already wired to beaches. Discovery, the photos that triggered the 12-hour fuse. The envelope lands on George Bundy's desk just after dawn, acetate still smelling like vinegar. He flips to a San Cristobal frame and stops, ribbed erector, cylindrical shadows on cribbing, berms carved like a clock face. He doesn't schedule a meeting. He walks the photos straight to the residence. Kennedy's in a robe when Bundy lays them on the coffee table and says, "They're there." Stakes lock in fast. Proof means options that can't be unsaid. Inside the Pentagon, plans don't wait for speeches. They sit on the edge of the runway. Airstrike, invasion, quarantine. Each one intersects pilots, Marines, Soviet crews, Cuban families and cities inside range rings that now touch Washington and Chicago. Kennedy understands the first move will write the second. Action tightens around a table that becomes a stage. EXCOMM forms. Rusk, McNamara, IFK, Taylor, Bundy, McCone, Dillon, Sorensen, with Llewellyn Thompson watching Moscow's mind. Briefers tap the prints. 4 MRBM sites building out, Sagula Grand showing activity, Sam belts like petals guarding the crown jewels. How long? Someone asks. Days to weeks for full readiness, they're told, but partial launch possible sooner. The room feels that phrase settle. Impact lands through voices. Curtis LeMay wants the hammer. Mass airstrikes, then invasion. You're in a pretty bad fix, he'll later tell Kennedy. McNamara runs ladders in his head, non-legal pads, arguing for a maritime quarantine to slow time and preserve control. RFK stares at the photos and says the quiet word that frames the moral problem, Pearl Harbor. A surprise attack, even on missile sites, would stain the cause they say they serve. Complication sits outside the frames. The island is already wired with tactical nuclear weapons, FKR coastal missiles for beaches, lunar rockets for staging areas, gravity bombs for IL-28s. Washington does know. Command authority is murky by design in case bombardment severs lines. If the United States bombs and then lands, a Soviet colonel in a cane field might be left with a code word and a choice. Meanwhile, what nobody in that room grasps, Soviet site crews aren't hypothetical. They're practicing erection drills, leveling guidance platforms, rehearsing fueling sequences under camo nets. Warhead mating is the last step. If time stretches, leverage grows. If time collapses, panic does. The clock people think starts today has been running since October 4, 1962, when warheads rolled off the Indogirka. The debate locks into the but therefore chain. Hit fast and you could decapitate the threat, but you'll likely miss some sites and kill Soviets. Therefore Moscow might answer in Berlin. Quarantine and you demonstrate resolve without blood, but missiles remain on the island for now. Therefore you live under a loaded gun while you bargain. Each scenario bends toward misread signals at sea and hair-trigger decisions onshore. Kennedy leans toward quarantine. It's a use of force with breaks, stop offensive weapons bound for Cuba, force a pause, open channels for a trade. It isn't neat. LeMay calls it weak. McNamara frames it as control. RFK sees a path that avoids the first shot while holding strength. The choice sets steel in motion that afternoon. One folder slides open like a ghost. ORTSAC, Castro spelled backward. Target folders mapped beaches east of Havana, drops zones for the 82nd and 101st Airborne, marine landings, armored pushes toward missile parks. If diplomacy fails, paper turns to beaches. Nobody in that room yet knows that tactical nukes already cover those beaches. As speechwriters trim nouns, the Navy shifts. Carriers sortie. Destroyers lace a line. The order, quarantine, not blockade. Signal, hail, warn, stop and search. Doctrine assumes the other side will read intent from distance and noise. That assumption will be stress-tested by heat, sonar, and a Foxtrot captain whose batteries are dying. In the hours before the television address, the photos circulate like voltage. A CIA analyst murmurs, "We've crossed from estimates to evidence." At Strategic Air Command, crews sit on alert, engines ready, heads down. In Moscow, Khrushchev reads a cable and tells aides the Americans have found the sites. He still thinks there's room to trade. Turkey's Jupiters for Cuba's R-12s, a non-invasion pledge to calm Havana. Kennedy's address names it. Unmistakable evidence, a quarantine, a demand for removal. He avoids blockade. He leaves a door open. He warns that any missile launched from Cuba will be treated as an attack by the Soviet Union. Cameras go dark. Phones light up across capitals. The public clock begins. The private fuse, tactical and strategic, was already lit. Hidden layers push under the waterline. 4 Foxtrot submarines ride beneath the quarantine arc, each carrying a single nuclear torpedo. Washington doesn't know they exist. American captains will try to signal with practice charges preset shallow, thinking they're tapping out Morse. In a steel tube at 110 degrees, those taps will sound like war. Back in the cabinet room, a final beat reframes the map. McCone points to the range rings and traces a finger from Pinar del Rio to the Midwest. Thompson adds a human read on Khrushchev, impulsive but not suicidal, open to deals that preserve face. RFK suggests a back channel. McNamara sketches a line of ships on memo paper and writes rules of engagement in the margins. Control, control, control. That night, the Navy holds station, SAC holds at the edge, and couriers carry drafts that will fly to Moscow and come back split in tone. One personal, one hard. The photos didn't just prove missiles. They forced a choice between momentum and friction, speed and control. The 12-hour fuse isn't a metaphor now. It's a window in which half-seen weapons can go from crates to armed, and a single misread splash can flip the table before anyone finishes a sentence.